Did your father have sexual contact with you?
Yes.
And how did it start?
Imagine living a life of unimaginable wealth, luxury, and privilege in one of the most famous zip codes in the world, Beverly Hills. But beneath the glamorous surface of this family, a dark and twisted reality was brewing. This is the story of two brothers, Lyle and Erik Menendez, who seemingly had everything but were driven to commit one of the most shocking crimes in American history. In 1989, the Menendez brothers brutally murdered their own parents, José and Kitty Menendez, claiming it was an act of self-defense against years of abuse. But was this really a desperate act of survival, or was there something more sinister behind the killings? The truth is still debated to this day, with new evidence and documentaries reopening the case. Today, we dive deep into the chilling tale of the Menendez brothers, their family, their motives, and the tragic events that led them to the courtroom and ultimately a lifetime behind bars. Stay with me as we unravel the truth behind the facade of wealth and power. This is a story you don't want to miss. Lyle and Erik Menendez were the sons of José Menendez, a wealthy and successful entertainment executive, and Kitty Menendez, a former school teacher turned socialite. The family lived in a Beverly Hills mansion surrounded by all the trappings of wealth, luxury cars, elite schooling, and the appearance of a perfect life. But underneath the surface, there were signs of deep familial dysfunction and emotional distress that would eventually explode into a horrific double murder. Though the Menendez family seemed picture perfect, Lyle and Erik's lives were far from idyllic. Behind closed doors, they claimed their father, Jose, was a controlling, abusive figure, while their mother, Kitty, was emotionally unstable. These alleged years of trauma would later form the brothers' defense when they stood trial for their parents' murders. Jose Menendez was a man who embodied the American dream. Born in Cuba, he emigrated to the United States with nothing, but through hard work and ambition, he rose to become one of the most powerful entertainment executives in Hollywood. By the time of his death, he had held key positions at RCA Records, where he signed major acts and helped shape the music industry, and later moved into the film world. Jose's success afforded his family an opulent lifestyle in Beverly Hills, complete with lavish homes, luxury cars, and all the trappings of extreme wealth. Kitty Menendez, born Mary Louise Anderson, came from a more modest background but quickly adapted to the life of a socialite after marrying Jose. She was described as a woman who loved to entertain and embraced her new life of luxury. However, beneath the glamorous exterior, Kitty struggled with emotional issues, allegedly suffering from depression and substance abuse, which would contribute to the turbulence within the family. Lyle and Erik Menendez grew up in this privileged environment, attending the best private schools and enjoying all the luxuries that came with their father's success. Yet, their upbringing was far from perfect. While they had every material advantage, their home life was reportedly filled with tension, strict discipline, and high expectations set by their father, Jose. The boys were often pushed to excel, particularly in academics and sports, where failure was not an option. Jose's determination to control every aspect of his sons' lives, coupled with Kitty's emotional instability, created a home environment that was described by the defense as a ticking time bomb. It's in this context that Lyle and Erik's story begins to take a dark turn, one where wealth and privilege couldn't mask the deeper, darker issues simmering beneath the surface. The night of August 20th, 1989 will forever be etched in the annals of American crime history. On this warm summer evening, the Menendez family home in Beverly Hills became the scene of a gruesome and unimaginable tragedy. Jose and Kitty Menendez were brutally murdered by their own sons, Lyle and Erik, in a crime so violent and disturbing that it shocked the nation. The murders took place in the den of the family's grand mansion. José Menendez was seated on the couch, watching television alongside his wife Kitty. The brothers, armed with shotguns they had recently purchased, entered the room with deadly intent. Without warning, they unleashed a barrage of gunfire, shooting their father in the back of the head. José was shot a total of 6 times, each shot precise and fatal. The force of the blast was so intense that it left his body nearly unrecognizable. Kitty, startled by the gunfire, tried to run but was struck down by a rain of bullets. She was shot 10 times, with one of the final shots aimed at her face, delivered by Lyle after he ran to his car to reload the shotgun. The brutality of the crime was staggering as her body lay in a pool of blood, the aftermath of such an excessive and vicious attack. The scene was nothing short of horrific. The sheer number of gunshots and the brutality of the attack left law enforcement officers speechless when they arrived at the crime scene. Blood spattered the walls and furniture, and the bodies of Jose and Kitty lay motionless in the den, a stark contrast to the mansion's luxurious surroundings. After committing the murders, Lyle and Erik did not flee the scene or immediately call the police. Instead, they calmly waited before phoning the authorities, claiming that they had just returned home from a night at the movies to find their parents dead. Their composed demeanor in the face of such carnage would later play a crucial role in raising suspicions. This night, defined by its shocking violence and excessive brutality, marked the beginning of a case that would captivate the public for years to come. When Lyle and Erik Menendez dialed 911 on the night of August 20th, 1989, their voices conveyed panic and shock. They claimed to have just returned home from a movie screening of Batman to find their parents brutally murdered in their Beverly Hills mansion. The brothers appeared distraught and shaken as they described the horrific scene to police dispatchers. Initially, this story seemed plausible, and when the police arrived at the Menendez home, they found Lyle and Erik visibly upset. At first glance, the police did not consider Lyle and Erik as potential suspects. The crime scene was gruesome, and the sheer brutality of the attack, especially the overkill, with Kitty being shot 10 times, suggested something far more sinister than a typical domestic dispute. Because Jose Menendez was a powerful entertainment executive with ties to the music and film industries, police considered the possibility of a mob hit. This theory gained traction due to Jose's high profile connections and his business dealings, which may have made him a target. The excessive violence, particularly the fact that both Jose and Kitty had been shot multiple times, fit the pattern of a mafia style execution. As a result, the initial investigation focused on the possibility that the Menendez family had been the victims of a contract killing. For several months, the police operated under this assumption and the brothers remained free from suspicion. However, cracks in their stories soon began to emerge. Despite their initial portrayal as devastated sons, their behavior after the murders, most notably their lavish spending, would eventually raise eyebrows and shift the focus of the investigation directly onto them. In the months following the brutal murders of their parents, Lyle and Erik Menendez's behavior began to raise serious suspicions among investigators. Instead of mourning quietly or keeping a low profile, the brothers embarked on a lavish spending spree that would ultimately lead police to question their innocence. In the immediate aftermath of the murders, the Menendez brothers seemed to embrace their newfound wealth. Lyle, the older brother, purchased a luxury Porsche and invested in a buffalo wing restaurant in New Jersey. Erik, who had shown promise as a tennis player, hired a professional coach and participated in high-end tournaments across the globe. The brothers splurged on designer clothes, expensive watches, and took lavish trips to London and the Caribbean. In just a few months, they collectively spent over $700,000, using their parents' fortune to fund a lifestyle of excess. Their sudden shift from grief to indulgence didn't go unnoticed. Friends, family, and eventually the police began to question how two young men who had just lost their parents in such a violent manner could engage in such conspicuous consumption. The police, who initially suspected a mob hit, began to shift their focus as they observed the brothers' increasingly extravagant behavior. While there had been no immediate physical evidence linking Lyle and Erik to the crime, their actions after the killings suggested that their motivations may have been financial. The brothers' spending spree seemed to fit a different narrative, one where the murders were premeditated to gain access to their parents' multimillion-dollar estate. As suspicions grew, investigators turned their attention to the Menendez brothers, setting the stage for a deeper probe into their involvement in the horrific crime. As the investigation into the Menendez brothers' spending and behavior intensified, detectives still lacked direct evidence to link them to the murders. That is, until Erik Menendez made a fateful confession that would ultimately unravel the case. Erik, struggling with guilt and fear, confided in his psychologist, Dr. Jerome Oziel, during a series of therapy sessions. In one of these sessions, Erik admitted to the horrifying truth: he and Lyle had killed their parents. This confession became the turning point in the investigation. However, the story of how this information reached the police is as dramatic as the crime itself. Dr. Oziel, bound by doctor-patient confidentiality, initially kept Erik's confession private, but his personal life complicated things. Oziel was involved in an extramarital affair with a woman named Judalyn Smythe, who would later play a pivotal role in the brothers' downfall. After Oziel and Smythe had a bitter argument and ended their relationship, Smythe, in a fit of rage, went to the police with the shocking information that Erik had confessed to killing his parents. This led to a legal battle over whether Dr. Oziel's tapes of his sessions with Erik could be used as evidence, given the confidentiality agreement between a therapist and patient. The California Supreme Court ultimately ruled that the tapes could be admitted because Oziel had claimed that Lyle Menendez had threatened him, thus nullifying the confidentiality agreement due to fear for his own safety. With Erik's confession recorded on tape and legally admissible, the police now had the crucial evidence they needed to arrest the brothers. In March 1990, Lyle was arrested, and 3 days later, Erik, who had been in Israel, returned to Los Angeles and turned himself in. This confession, along with their bizarre behavior following the murders, would soon lead to one of the most infamous trials of the 20th century. In March of 1990, after Erik's confession had reached the police, the net began to close around the Menendez brothers. Lyle was the first to be arrested. On March 8th, he was taken into custody at the family's home in Beverly Hills. The arrest was a quiet one, with no dramatic chase or resistance. Lyle had been living his life as if nothing had happened, but by this point, the mounting suspicions, extravagant spending, and Erik's confession had given the police enough to make their move. Erik, who had been in Israel at the time of Lyle's arrest, was fully aware that the police were closing in on him. 3 days later, on March 11th, he returned to Los Angeles and, accompanied by his lawyer, turned himself into the authorities. Erik's decision to return and face arrest was likely a result of the overwhelming evidence building against him and his brother. Both brothers were charged with the murder of their parents and held without bail, given the severity of the charges. Due to the nature of the crime and the high-profile status of the case, Lyle and Erik were placed in separate jails to prevent them from communicating with one another. This separation ensured that the two would not be able to coordinate any stories or strategies during the early stages of their prosecution. Their arrest marked the beginning of a long and highly publicized legal battle. As the case unfolded, the shocking details of the murders and the Menendez family's dark secrets would captivate the nation, making it one of the most sensational trials of the decade. The Menendez brothers' first trial, which began in 1993, became a nationwide sensation, largely due to its live broadcast on Court TV. For the first time, millions of Americans could watch every detail of the case unfold in real time, making it one of the most publicized trials of the decade. Lyle and Erik Menendez's defense team made headlines by claiming that the brothers had not murdered their parents out of greed or cold-blooded calculation, but in self-defense. According to their defense, the killings were the result of years of emotional, physical, and sexual abuse at the hands of their father, José Menendez. The trial gripped the public as the brothers painted a harrowing picture of their family life, alleging that José Menendez had been a tyrannical and abusive father. They testified that their father had sexually abused them from a young age, and their mother, Kitty, was complicit, turning a blind eye to the abuse. The defense argued that by August 1989, the brothers were living in constant fear, believing that their parents would kill them to keep the family's dark secrets from coming to light. This narrative of abuse was supported by testimony from family members, including the brother's cousin, who claimed Erik had confided in him about the sexual abuse years before the murders. The defense also presented disturbing evidence, including photographs and graphic descriptions of the abuse, to bolster the argument that the brothers acted out of sheer terror. However, the prosecution painted a very different picture. They argued that Lyle and Erik had killed their parents not out of fear, but to gain access to their multimillion-dollar estate. The prosecution highlighted the brothers' lavish spending after the murders, suggesting that financial gain was their primary motive. This back and forth between the defense and prosecution captivated viewers as the case transformed from a straightforward murder trial into a broader exploration of family dynamics, abuse, and privilege. Despite the compelling nature of the case, the trial ended with a hung jury. Both juries, one for each brother, could not reach a unanimous verdict, leading to a mistrial. The failure to convict the brothers in this first trial only intensified public interest, setting the stage for the dramatic retrial that would follow. The abuse allegations against José Menendez formed the emotional crux of the defense in the Menendez brothers' trial. Lyle and Erik testified that their father José had subjected them to years of sexual and emotional abuse beginning when they were children. According to their testimony, this abuse was not sporadic but a regular part of their upbringing, with Erik claiming it started when he was just 6 years old. Lyle and Erik described Jose as a tyrannical figure who demanded total obedience while inflicting unimaginable harm on them. Kitty Menendez, their mother, was also accused of failing to protect her sons. The brothers portrayed her as emotionally unstable, complicit in her husband's actions, and even abusive in her own right. She was said to have turned a blind eye to the horrors happening in her household, perhaps out of denial or her own mental health struggles, including alleged substance abuse problems. These claims of abuse were supported by some family members who testified during the trial. Erik's cousin, Andy Cano, recalled how Erik had confided in him about the sexual abuse years earlier. Another cousin, Diane Vander Molen, testified that she had once confronted Kitty with concerns about Jose's behavior, only to be dismissed. The defense argued that the years of abuse left the brothers in a constant state of fear, leading them to believe that their parents were planning to kill them to keep the family's secrets hidden. This fear, they claimed, culminated in the murders, which they presented as acts of self-defense. However, the prosecution questioned the credibility of these allegations, suggesting they were a fabricated excuse to justify the killings and avoid harsh punishment. This deeply emotional and controversial aspect of the case left the public divided. Were Lyle and Erik victims of long-term abuse or cold-blooded murderers motivated by greed? The truth of these claims would remain a point of intense debate throughout the trial and beyond. The first trial of Lyle and Erik Menendez in 1993 ended in an unexpected and dramatic fashion, with two hung juries, one for each brother. This outcome meant that neither jury could reach a unanimous decision on whether the brothers were guilty of first-degree murder. The trial had already been one of the most sensational legal spectacles in years, thanks to its live broadcast on Court TV, which allowed millions of viewers to witness the proceedings as they unfolded. The defense had argued that the brothers acted out of fear and desperation after enduring years of sexual, emotional, and physical abuse from their father, José Menendez. Their claims of self-defense, insisting they believed their parents were going to kill them, were powerful, but they clearly divided the jurors. While some jurors sympathized with the brothers' portrayal of themselves as victims, others were unconvinced, particularly given the prosecution's argument that the murders were motivated by greed. The brothers' lavish spending in the months following the killings was a key part of the prosecution's case, suggesting that financial gain rather than fear had driven the murders. The result was two deadlocked juries, each split over whether to convict the brothers of first-degree murder or accept a lesser charge such as manslaughter due to the abuse allegations. The hung juries led to a mistrial, which only intensified the media frenzy surrounding the case. Public debate raged on, with many taking sides, some seeing the brothers as traumatized victims, while others viewed them as cold-blooded killers. With the mistrial, the case was far from over. The brothers would face a retrial, but this time the rules would change and the media circus would become even more intense as new details and restrictions were put in place for what was shaping up to be a defining moment in true crime history. The second trial of Lyle and Erik Menendez, which began in 1995, was markedly different from the first. After the media circus that surrounded the first trial thanks to its live broadcast on Court TV, the judge in the second trial, Stanley Weisberg, imposed strict limitations. This time, cameras were banned from the courtroom, preventing the public from watching the proceedings in real time. This decision significantly reduced the sensationalism surrounding the trial, although public interest remained high. One of the most critical differences in the second trial was the judge's decision to limit the testimony about the brothers' allegations of abuse. During the first trial, the defense heavily relied on the brothers' claims of sexual, physical, and emotional abuse by their father, José Menendez, and their mother's complicity. This narrative had swayed some jurors, leading to the hung juries. However, for the second trial, Judge Weisberg ruled that much of this testimony would not be admitted as evidence. This move severely weakened the defense's ability to paint Lyle and Erik as long-term victims acting out of desperation. Additionally, expert testimony on the psychological effects of abuse was not allowed in the second trial. The defense had previously used this expert insight to argue that the brothers' mental state, shaped by years of trauma, had played a role in their decision to kill their parents. Without this expert backing, the defense's narrative of self-defense became much harder to sustain. The prosecution, meanwhile, maintained its argument that the murders were motivated by greed. They pointed to the brothers' extravagant spending spree in the months after the killings as evidence that Lyle and Erik had killed their parents to access the family fortune. With the limited scope for abuse-related evidence, the prosecution's narrative held stronger sway in this trial. The second trial lacked the intense media spectacle. In the second trial of Lyle and Erik Menendez, the prosecution focused on a straightforward yet damning narrative that the brothers murdered their parents for financial gain. The state's case hinged on the belief that Lyle and Erik were motivated by greed, seeking to inherit the family's multimillion-dollar fortune after killing José and Kitty Menendez in cold blood. To bolster this argument, the prosecution pointed to the brothers' behavior in the months following the murders. Instead of showing grief or sorrow, Lyle and Erik embarked on a lavish spending spree that seemed completely incongruous with the tragedy they had supposedly endured. The brothers spent approximately $700,000 in the 6 months following the murders. This included purchasing luxury items such as Rolex watches, designer clothes, a new Porsche, and expensive trips to places like London and the Caribbean. Lyle Menendez, in particular, made high-profile purchases, including buying a restaurant in New Jersey, which raised further questions about his intentions. Erik, meanwhile, focused on his tennis career, hiring a professional coach and traveling internationally to compete. Both brothers rented luxury apartments and continued to live extravagantly. The prosecution argued that this spending spree was clear evidence of a premeditated plan to kill their parents for money. They claimed that Lyle and Erik were driven not by fear of abuse, but by a desire to free themselves from their parents' control while simultaneously gaining access to their wealth. The prosecution framed the brothers as cold and calculating, suggesting that they had grown tired of their father's strictness and wanted to live lives of freedom and luxury without any financial constraints. This focus on the brothers' financial motives, combined with the limitations placed on the defense's ability to discuss the alleged abuse, gave the prosecution a strong position in the second trial. The lavish spending in the wake of the murders became a key piece of evidence supporting the prosecution's theory that the Menendez brothers had committed these murders for personal and financial gain. The defense in the second trial of Lyle and Erik Menendez rested on a tragic narrative that the brothers had endured years of relentless abuse at the hands of their father, José Menendez, and in the end killed their parents out of sheer terror. The defense team argued that Lyle and Erik did not act out of greed or malice, but from a deep-rooted fear for their lives, a fear that had built up over a lifetime of alleged sexual, physical, and emotional abuse. According to the defense, José Menendez was a tyrannical figure in the home. Lyle and Erik testified that their father had sexually abused them for years, starting when they were very young. Erik, in particular, recounted how the abuse began when he was around 6 years old. The brothers described a household where failure to meet José's impossibly high standards led to severe punishment, not only physical but emotional, leaving them psychologically scarred. Their mother, Kitty, was portrayed as an emotionally unstable enabler who either turned a blind eye to the abuse or contributed to the toxic environment. The defense described her as volatile and negligent, failing to protect her sons from the horrors they claimed to have experienced. The defense argued that by the time of the murders, the brothers believed they were in imminent danger. In their testimony, Lyle and Erik claimed they feared their parents were planning to kill them to prevent the truth about the abuse from coming to light. The brothers' accounts painted the killings not as premeditated, but as a desperate and tragic act of survival, the only way they felt they could escape the nightmare they had lived in for years. The abuse narrative was compelling, but in the second trial, Judge Weisberg limited the scope of testimony regarding the alleged abuse. Expert testimony about the psychological impact of long-term abuse was also excluded, which hampered the defense's ability to build a robust case around the idea that the brothers acted out of self-defense. The defense's argument hinged on convincing the jury that these years of alleged abuse had left the brothers so emotionally damaged that they genuinely believed their only way out was through murder. However, without the extensive evidence and testimony allowed in the first trial, the defense struggled to fully develop this narrative, placing them at a significant disadvantage in their attempt to sway the jury. In 1996, after a lengthy second trial, Lyle and Erik Menendez were found guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder for the brutal killings of their parents, José and Kitty Menendez. The jury in this trial ultimately rejected the brothers' defense that they had killed out of fear for their lives due to years of abuse. Unlike the hung juries in the first trial, the second trial jurors were not swayed by the defense's claims of self-defense, largely because much of the abuse testimony had been limited. The prosecution's argument that the murders were financially motivated played a key role in the jury's decision. The brothers' extravagant spending spree following the killings, along with the limited introduction of evidence regarding the alleged abuse, led the jury to believe that Lyle and Erik had acted out of greed rather than fear. The fact that they had shot their parents multiple times with shotguns further strengthened the prosecution's case of premeditated murder. In the penalty phase of the trial, the jury chose not to impose the death penalty, citing the brothers' lack of prior criminal records and their troubled family background. However, the decision was still harsh. Both Lyle and Erik were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The verdict marked the end of a trial that had captivated the nation, but it also left many questions about the brothers' true motivations and the extent of the abuse allegations. In the sentencing phase of the trial in 1996, Lyle and Erik Menendez were spared the death penalty, but both were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The jury's decision to forego the death penalty was influenced by several key factors, including the brothers' lack of prior criminal records and their deeply troubled family background, which had been highlighted throughout the trial. Although the prosecution argued that the murders were premeditated and motivated by financial greed, the defense had succeeded in presenting a picture of the Menendez household as one filled with emotional turmoil, allegations of abuse, and deep dysfunction. The jury acknowledged that while the brothers had committed a heinous act, the mitigating circumstances surrounding their upbringing and the emotional impact of the alleged abuse weighed against the harshest possible sentence. In the end, the jury was divided between those who believed the abuse claims might have played a role in the killings and those who were convinced that the murders were purely about money. However, even the jurors who rejected the self-defense claim believed the death penalty was too severe, given that the brothers had no history of violence before the murders. Lyle and Erik Menendez were sentenced to life in prison without parole, a punishment that sealed their fate and ensured they would spend the rest of their lives behind bars. To this day, the case remains one of the most infamous in American legal history, with ongoing debate over whether justice was truly served. The public reaction to the Menendez brothers' verdict was deeply divided. On one side, many were horrified by the brutality of the murders. Two young men, who seemingly had everything, had shot their parents in cold blood. The sheer violence of the crime, including the multiple gunshots and the methodical nature of the killings, shocked the nation. For these individuals, the guilty verdict seemed just, and life imprisonment without parole was an appropriate punishment for such a brutal and premeditated crime. However, there was another side to the public reaction. Many people sympathized with Lyle and Erik Menendez, largely due to the claims of long-term sexual, emotional, and physical abuse by their father, José Menendez. The detailed allegations of a traumatic upbringing swayed some to believe that the brothers had been pushed to the brink, acting not out of greed, but out of desperation and fear. The fact that their mother, Kitty, was also portrayed as an enabler or even an abuser further complicated the narrative. This split in public opinion left the Menendez case as one of the most debated and controversial in American legal history. Since their conviction, Lyle and Erik Menendez have pursued numerous appeals in an attempt to overturn their sentences. These appeals have largely been unsuccessful, with courts repeatedly upholding their life sentences without parole. However, recent developments have reignited interest in their case. In 2023, new evidence emerged suggesting that José Menendez had also sexually abused a member of the boy band Menudo. Roy Rosello, a former member of the band, came forward with allegations that Jose had assaulted him when he was a teenager, which provided further support to the brothers' claims of abuse. This new evidence has fueled efforts to reopen the case, with the brothers' defense team arguing that this could provide further context to their state of mind at the time of the murders. Although the case has not yet been reopened, the ongoing legal battles highlight the persistent controversy surrounding the Menendez brothers and the question of whether their actions were influenced by years of trauma. The Netflix docuseries Monsters, the Lyle and Erik Menendez story has brought renewed attention to the case decades after the original trial. Part of Netflix's Monsters anthology, the series explores the complexities of the Menendez brothers' lives, delving deeper into the abuse allegations that were central to their defense. The docuseries presents new insights and perspectives, particularly regarding the long-term effects of the alleged abuse at the hands of their father, José Menendez. The series has reignited the public's fascination with the Menendez case, especially in light of the new evidence that has surfaced over the years. It paints a more nuanced picture of the brothers not just as murderers, but as individuals who may have been deeply scarred by the abuse they endured. This fresh exploration of the case has brought a new generation of viewers into the fold, many of whom are questioning whether justice was truly served. Over the years, the Menendez case has been the subject of numerous documentaries, books, and television specials, cementing the brothers as infamous figures in the true crime world. The live broadcast of their first trial on Court TV turned them into household names, and subsequent media portrayals have kept their story alive. From in-depth interviews to detailed analyses of their defense, the Menendez brothers have remained a focal point in discussions about true crime and familial abuse. The media's portrayal of the brothers has evolved over time. Initially seen by many as ruthless killers, later documentaries and series have explored the psychological impact of their alleged abuse, shifting public perception. Today, the Menendez brothers are often seen through a more sympathetic lens by some, who view them as victims of a dysfunctional and abusive family, while others still see them as manipulative murderers driven by greed. The Menendez brothers case remains one of the most enduring and controversial true crime stories in American history. It has sparked discussions about familial abuse, privilege, and the criminal justice system. Were Lyle and Erik victims of a lifetime of trauma, pushed to commit an unthinkable crime in an effort to survive, or were they cold-blooded killers who sought to inherit their parents' wealth? These questions continue to divide public opinion. Today, Lyle and Erik Menendez remain behind bars, serving life sentences without the possibility of parole. Despite their legal battles, appeals, and the introduction of new evidence, their fate seems sealed for now. However, the ongoing debate over their guilt, their claims of abuse, and the justice of their sentences ensures that the Menendez brothers' story will remain a point of fascination for years to come.
Did your father have sexual contact with you?
Yes.
And how did it start?
Just started with, after sports practices, he would massage me, and we would have these talks, and he would show me, and he would fondle me, and he would ask me to do the same with him, and I would touch him, and we would undress. Just became more involved.
What do you mean more involved?
We would be in the bathroom, and he would put me on my knees, and he would guide me, all my movements, and I would have oral sex with him.
Did you want to do this? At some point, did he do some other things to you?
Yes.
What else did he do to you?
He raped me. And he said that he didn't mean to hurt me. And he loved me.
What did he tell you about telling people?
He just said that it was our secret. That bad things would happen to me if I told anybody. And I told him I never would.
The Erik Menendez defense, Your Honor, calls Erik Menendez.
Well, I wanted to be liked as much as Lyle. He would stick things in me as he was giving me oral sex, or at times he would just sit on the bed with his legs up, spread, and with his back to the back of the bed, and he would have me give him oral sex, and he would stick the needles or the tacks into my thighs as he was doing this.
Were there times when, following one of these episodes with your father, you'd be crying?
Yes.
Did your mother ever come upon you when you were crying?
Sometimes after these, I'd have to go downstairs to dinner, or afterwards, and she would come when she'd see me crying, and,
Did
yes.
she ever ask you, Erik, what are you crying about?
No.
Would she ask you that sometimes if you were crying and it had nothing to do with sex with your father?
Yes.
And what would she say, if anything, to you when you were crying following these episodes with your father?
She would say, do what I told you to do.
What had she told you to do?
She taught me how to hide my tears and to not cry. And if I was crying, she taught me how to get rid of the tears. I just wanted more than anything else that when I died, that no one would find out that this was happening to me.
Did you do something to your brother?
Yes.
What did you do to your brother?
I took him out to the woods whenever I felt, I don't know, I took him out sometimes, and I took a toothbrush also, and I played with Erik in the same way. And I'm sorry.
And he says it with such shame, but what is even more convincing, and I was sitting about 10 feet from Erik, is I saw this vein start popping out of his forehead as he hears his brother apologizing, as their own secret, horrible sordidness comes out into public on television. That emotion, that's what a victim, not an actor, that's what a victim looks like.
When you were about 13, did you think that it might be happening to someone else?
Yes.
And who did you think it was happening to?
Erik. He told me that Erik made things up sometimes, but that it would stop, and we should keep it just between us, or he'd kill me.
Did you ever tell anybody what you thought was going on?
No, I told him I would never tell anybody. I just wanted to stop.